सद्धर्म संस्थापको लोकानां हितकारिणं त्रिभुवने मन्नं शरणाकरं राधा कृष्ण पदारविन्द भजनानन्देन मत्वालिको वन्दे रूपसनातनं रघुजुगं श्री जीव गोपालकं कृष्ण कीर्तन गान नर्तन परं प्रेमामृतं वनिधि श्री चैतन्य कृपाभरं भुवि भुव वरावहं तारकं वन्दे रूपसनातनं रघुयुगं श्रीजीव गोपालकं श्रीगौराङ्ग गुणानुवर्णन विधौ सध्यासनिधार्मितं
Om Jnana-timirandasya Jnananjana-salakaya Chakshurunmilitam yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Ajunulambito Bhujo Kanakabhatatu Sankirtanaya Kapitaro Kamalaya Taksho Vishwambaro Dvijabaro Yugadharma Palo Vande Jagat Priyakaro Karunavataro Vande Shri Kṛṣṇa Chaitanya Nityananda Sahodito Gurudaya Pushpavanto Chitro Sangdo Tamuno Vandeham Shri Rāma Krishna Abhayo Charano Sako Sukado Paramanando Sundaro Subalapriyo Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye.
Shri Guru Vaishnav Guru Parampara Ki Jai, Śrī Jīva Gosvāmī Ki Jai, Sat Sandarbhas Ki Jai, Anantakota Vaishnavinda Ki Jai. Glorious devotees, thank you so much for attending another presentation on Śrīla Jīva Gosvāmī's Sat Sandarbhas. Today we begin discussion of the Kṛṣṇa Sandarbha. This discussion will be a detailed review of all the Anuchedas. And we will continue now. Just a reminder of the significance of the Sandarbhas. This is from a verse written by, composed by Satyanarayan Das, who has given us the English translation, which we are speaking from. One who has not undergone comprehensive study of Sat Sandarbhas must struggle to assimilate the message of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. One who has studied Sat Sandarbhas, however, will have no misgivings about the essential meaning of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. So first, a short introduction based on the introduction written by Satyanarayan Das, taking out some key points just to highlight the significance of this particular Sandarbha, the fourth in the presentation by Śrī Jīva Gosvāmī. Notwithstanding Krishna's enigmatic nature, It is essential to gain a clear picture of his true ontological status in order to grasp the significance of the Bhagavad Purana and the method by which it self-discloses truth, namely bhakti yoga. So Krishna's enigmatic nature is certainly there. He's known as the speaker of Bhagavad Gita, one of the most profound discussions on transcendental philosophy to Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. He's known for his amazing pastimes 5,000 years ago, and his being the butter thief, the child of Mother Yasoda, marrying 16,108 wives in Dwarka, being a profound prince at that time, and also for his earlier romantic affairs in Vraj with the young gopis, his stealing of their garments, and other such dalliances. So, irrespective of that, still, there's some misunderstanding as to his true ontological status. As a general rule, Krishna is viewed as a Leela avatar of Vishnu or of Narayan. So the Kṛṣṇa Sandarbha is there to specifically to establish the ontological position of Bhagavan Śrī Kṛṣṇa in relation to all the Lord's other manifestations. And prior to the Kṛṣṇa Sandarbha, and specifically prior to the advent of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, this specific distinctive characteristic of Bhagavan Śrī Kṛṣṇa, or Krishna, Vraj Krishna as we know him, was not truly and fully exposed. So it's all this kind of an approach and an understanding of Krishna's ontological position in relationship to all the manifestations of the Supreme Lord is really coming as part of the dispensation of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Golokar Premadan Harinam Sankirtan. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Sankirtan is bringing into human society the topmost conception of spirituality as seen in light of the internality of the Lord's Leelas with his most intimate associates in Golok, that topmost transcendental realm. So a little more here from the introduction. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam specifically propounds the supreme dharma of humanity, which is love for Bhagavan, our very source and refuge. To be infused with transcendental love for Bhagavan, authentic and unambiguous knowledge about him and his essential being is of the utmost importance. Since Bhagavan has innumerable forms, such as Vishnu, Rāma, Krishna, and Nṛsiṁha, the question must be asked, are they all equal primordial in their constitution constitutional status, or is there some hierarchy of being among them? To address this question, Śrī Jīva Gosvāmī wrote this book, Kṛṣṇa Sandarbha. The conventional, and for the most part, unexamined point of view is that Krishna is simply an avatar of Vishnu. In Kṛṣṇa Sandarbha, Śrī Jīva Gosvāmī uproots this misconception, demonstrating that Bhagavan Viṣṇu, being ontologically related to the play of creation and hence to immanence, is himself implicitly included within a more complete transcendent whole, avatārī, or source of the avatars, or descents of the Supreme into the material manifestations, technically known as Svayaṁ Bhagavān, who is clearly identified in the text as Śrī Kṛṣṇa. By first establishing a comprehensive universal understanding of Bhagavan in Bhagavān Sandarbha, Jīva Gosvāmī laid the foundation for a detailed investigation into the ontology of Svayaṁ Bhagavān in Kṛṣṇa Sandarbha. So as we've explained many times, the first three of the 6 Sandarbhas are a very elaborate unpacking of the verse Vedanti tat tattvavidas tattvam yas jnanamadvayam brahmeti paramatmeti Bhagavan iti subjite. So the supreme non-dual absolute is viewed by various transcendentalists as Brahman without specific characteristics, Paramatma as eminent within the material manifestations, and as Bhagavan according to the angle of vision. So now we're coming to having elaborated fully, on that point. Jīva Gosvāmī now goes on to the Parivā Sutra of the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, the key that unlocks the secrets of the text itself, Kṛṣṇastu Bhagavan Svayam. Now, this is all based upon a statement made by Sutta Goswami in the 3rd chapter of the 1st canto of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. After elaborating on all the different avataric descents of the Supreme, he makes this statement that of all these, the Svayaṁ Bhagavān, the original personality of Godhead, is Bhagavan Śrī Kṛṣṇa. So we are going to find here in the beginning of the Kṛṣṇa Sandarbha an elaborate unpacking of the 3rd chapter of the 1st canto of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam and the statements made there by Sutta Goswami in response to one of the 6 questions by Sunaka, that question being, could you explain the descents of the Supreme Lord, the manifestations of the Supreme Lord that have come into the material manifestation? So again, more from this introduction. In the very beginning of Tattva Sandarbha, he clearly stipulated that the subject of the 6 Sandarbhas is meant specifically for those whose sole aspiration is to be immersed in the bhajan of Śrī Kṛṣṇa. So again, a unique addition to a Mangalacharana by Jiva Goswāmī, a qualification for the reader. Coming out of a general Mangalacharana verse intended to bless blessings upon the reader or one who approaches a spiritual text. So we have praise for the Supreme Lord, an elaboration on the subject matter, and various benedictions that are available through a text. These are the general verses that comprise a Mangalacharana. So we can actually see this specific qualification verse coming out of both, an explanation of the text, a Mangalacharana explaining the text itself, and this text is for those that want to immerse themselves in bhajan for Śrī Kṛṣṇa. This is the specificity of the Bhagavad Purana itself. It may not be seen by all schools of Vaishnavas as specifying Śrī Kṛṣṇa, because not all schools of Vaishnava thought accept the Parivas Sutra that the Gaudiyas do of Krishna stu Bhagavan Svayam. But we do, and therefore the Sandarbhas of Jiva Goswāmī are for Gaudiya Vaishnavas, for those that want to immerse themselves in bhajan for Krishna and have an ideal of Śrī Kṛṣṇa as their Istadev, as their ultimate attainment. Continuing, in order for a devotee to be rightly established in bhajan, he must have a clear understanding of the true nature of his object of worship. In Kṛṣṇa Sandarbha, Śrī Jīva Gosvāmī provides this distinct and esoteric knowledge of Krishna, the supreme worshipable deity. I'm just going to continue here. Śrī Jīva Gosvāmī traces out Krishna's factual status among all the avatars of Bhagavan based upon his careful study of the Bhagavad Purana. Not only does he demonstrate that Krishna is the original form of God, Svayaṁ Bhagavān, he goes a step further to establish a hierarchy within Krishna's own multifaceted manifestations. In this respect, he discloses that Krishna, as a cowherder and lover in Vraj, is superior to his manifestation as a royal statesman in Mathura and Dwarka. This fact is so abstruse that even among Vaishnavas, there are some who have difficulty in comprehending and accepting it. This precise realization, however, is crucial for the practice of Raganuga Bhakti, or pure devotion in the wake of natural affection, which is the subject of the next book in this series, Bhakti Sandarbha. So here, Jiva Goswāmī is going to firmly fix us in the ontological reality of Bhagavan Śrī Kṛṣṇa. And even within the different dhams or places of transcendental Leela of Krishna, there is a hierarchy. And Krishna manifests his most unique characteristics in Vraj. His flute playing is only there in Vraj. His Leela, wherein those involved in the Leela and even he himself set aside his godliness is there in Vraj. The beauty of his form is most fully manifest in Vraj, in his leelas there. And his leelas there are the topmost, Prema Madhurya. So these four specific characteristics of Krishna are there in Vraj, and these are the quintessential manifestations of his true spiritual opulence. Although you could say that he manifests his opulence where he's worshipped as God, his true opulence is manifested in Vraj in these four specific manifestations of love that are his characteristics there. And if we think this, just to take a little aside here and look at what is our practice of bhakti. Truly, what we are trying to do is we are immersing ourselves in an appreciation of Krishna in his most intimate manifestation. Developing an appreciation is appreciation for him in this form, with these associates, and in this environment is central to our practice of Raganuga Bhakti. But as pointed out here, in order to fully immerse ourselves in such a practice, we must have a comprehensive understanding. We will note as we proceed in this exploration of Jiva Goswami's Kṛṣṇa Sandarbha that in the beginning, Jiva approaches the ontological reality of Krishna in a very methodical manner and in a very thorough manner, which may seem a little over the top, we could say, like we understand Krishna is God. Well, yes, that's okay, but do we really understand? So this pounding of the post is going to be quite evident, especially here in the very beginning of Kṛṣṇa Sandarbha. So Kṛṣṇa Sandarbha is therefore the most important of all the ontological writings in the Gaudiya Vaishnava school, because it unravels the mystery regarding the Gaudiya Vaishnavas' worshipful deity, which gives the school its unique identity. Śrī Jīva Gosvāmī wrote the first three Sandarbhas, Tattva, Bhagavat, and Paramatma, based on the Bhagavat Purana's famous Vedanti verse. While treating their own graded thematic subjects, these first three Sandarbhas ultimately serve as an introduction to the fourth volume, Kṛṣṇa Sandarbha, in which Śrī Jīva Gosvāmī ascertains the identity of the original form of Bhagavan. And that's just a short introduction. It is followed in the written presentation by an overview, but since we're going to go deeply into the subject step by step. We'll just dive right in and go to the very first Anucheta. Krishna is Svayaṁ Bhagavān, the source of the Purusha avatars. It would seem that Jiva Goswami is covering ground that he's already covered in his Paramatma Sandarbha. But there is some logic here, because he begins by pointing to Sutta Goswami's third chapter, as given in the third chapter of the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. So he's going to go comprehensively through those verses and highlight what's coming from the Bhagavatam in light of the Parivas Sutra and in light of other statements in the Bhagavatam. So when we actually come to this Parivas Sutra, we can see how the key works, how it fits in the lock to unpacking a comprehensive understanding of all the different manifestations of the Supreme Lord. And we can see that this is one of the unique characteristics of the followers of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Their unpacking and complete analysis of what's in the Bhagavatam. Take, for example, the Bhagavatam's second chapter, the very second chapter, wherein Sutta Goswami outlines the step-by-step stages of involvement in the practice of bhakti. Now, that section, of course, becomes a verse and is further unpacked by Rupa Goswami in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Adau, Shraddha, Tata Sadhu, Sango, Tha, Bhajana, Kriya, etc. All the different 9 stages of devotional practice are unpacked there. We have a more elaborate unpacking of those verses by Vishwanath himself in his Madhurya Kadambini, where he really elaborates on those verses as presented by Sutta Goswami and gives us basically a handbook for our practice of devotional service according to where we are in those various advancing stages. What are the characteristics of those stages? What should we expect to be going through? And as we advance in our devotional practice. So just a few verses from the Bhagavatam are unpacked by Vishwanath there in Madhurya Kadambini, are further elaborated on by Rupa Goswami to give us a handbook for devotional life in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, of which we have a summary study by Srila Prabhupada, which he called the Handbook for Krishna Consciousness, the Nectar of Devotion. So now we see that here we have Jiva Goswami going to the third chapter of the first canto of the Bhagavatam and giving us a comprehensive unpacking of what Sutta Goswami presented there in response to Sunaka's question regarding the avataric descents of the Supreme. So you'll see it's going to be quite comprehensive. And although there is this pounding of the post regarding the Purusha avatars, or those avataric manifestations of the Supreme, which bring about the material world, it's a further elaboration which takes us deeper into this understanding. Our discussion of the Kṛṣṇa Sandarbha will be complete. So I will be reading the complete Anuchetas as presented in English, and then taking highlights from the commentary and also commenting there. So let us begin. Jiva Goswāmī begins his Kṛṣṇa Sandarbha as follows. This Kṛṣṇa Sandarbha is now being undertaken to determine the precise identity of Śrī Bhagavan, whose supremacy over all other forms of the Godhead has been established in the 3 previous Sandarbhas. In those first 3 volumes, it was stated in accordance with the Vedanti verse 1-11 that the one and only reality, Tattva, is designated by 3 names: Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. These 3 manifestations are distinguished in the 3rd chapter of the 1st canto of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. In the following verse, however, it's specifically Brahman that is being pointed out. When these gross and subtle bodies, which are superimposed on the self through ignorance, are seen through by the appearance of authentic self-knowledge, then the immediate intuition of Brahman occurs. So Sutta Goswāmī is pointing out here that regarding Brahman, if we can be so contemplative, and such contemplation would have to go deep to the point of a complete identification, a samadhi, so to speak, of what we really are. If we can enter that deeply and see through what's imposed upon us as a gross and subtle body, in our state of misidentification with the material world, if we can see through that, then what will be intuited from that experience will be Brahman. We are not, basically, we are spirit soul. Now, that Brahman revelation will be without specificity, but at least it is pointed out by Sutta Goswāmī in the Bhagavatam and highlighted here by Jiva in order to give us some insight into what is meant by the terminology Brahman. Brahman means setting aside all artificial impositions on ourself. If we can set those aside, then we can come to the pure essence of our being, which is spirit. And that gives us a very definitive point of reference when it comes to Brahman understanding, an intellectual understanding of Brahman, and of course, a comprehensive appreciation for what is Brahman realization. Yet, because Brahman is distinct and is disclosed as unitary, there is no doubt whatsoever as to its nature. Consequently, Jiva continues, statements to ascertain Brahman from the Bhagavat are not being cited. Because, however, the manifestation of Śrī Bhagavan and Paramatma are numerous, verses will be cited to determine their identities. So Brahman is unitary. There's only one Brahman. That's the nature of even the terminology Brahman. That all-encompassing, all-pervasive, all-conscious awareness of being without, but there's no specificity. Brahman doesn't live somewhere or reside somewhere or display himself somewhere. When we say Brahman, Brahman is everywhere. Brahman is not of one nature or another nature in relationship with the material manifestation. Brahman is not of one manifestation or another manifestation according to how it is worshipped. It meaning it is the ultimate unitary itness, so to speak. That's all it is. It's everything. That is consciousness. And we can't, there's no need to explain it. So therefore, Jiva says, we're not going to go there. I'm not going to go there. We're not going to take out those verses and analyze from the viewpoint of the Bhagavat what is Brahman. We're not going to cite them. I'm not going to discuss them, because apprehending Brahman is already, as much as you can apprehend Brahman, you can apprehend it by looking at Sutta Goswami's verse that we've just cited and looking at yourself and then stripping away everything that makes you what you are in the material manifestation. Strip away the material, your material environment, your material likes and dislikes. Strip away everything that is your false sense of being and identity, and there you have it. Let's start there for an understanding of Brahman. But I'm here and you're here because you want a relationship with Krishna. That's what my Sandarbhas are for. And if you've made it this far in your study, then what need is there for me to go into this detail? Jiva continues, of these two, meaning Bhagavan and Paramatma, it was earlier concluded that Isvara, the supreme regulator of Maya and the Jiva, is not formless. The supreme self, Purusha, who is immanent within all beings, Sarva Acharyami, has been propounded by the word Paramatma in those very Sandarbhas. Such being the case, the Purusha is illustrated in precisely the same terms in the beginning of the 3rd chapter of the 1st canto. In other words, Sutta begins description of the various avatars by addressing the Purusha avatars. There would be no other avataric descents unless there was a material manifestation there for them to make themselves available to us within this realm. It may be questioned here that the one absolute reality was earlier stated to have the three aspects of Brahman and so on. In this regard, what then are the distinguishing characteristics of Brahman, or for that matter, of Bhagavan or Paramatma? Do they indeed possess such attributes, and what are they? Jiva's posing the question. Anticipating such a question from the sage Saunaka and others, Sri Sutta responds as follows. Very beginning of the 3rd chapter. In the beginning, prior to the cosmic manifestation, the Supreme Personal Absolute Bhagavan, intending to evolve the cosmos, manifested the form of the Purusha, who was enfolded within Sambhutam, him along with the tattvas beginning with Mahat, and endowed with the 16 evolutionary principles necessary for creation. We will get into the details of that. So, Jiva Goswāmī continues. It is specifically Śrī Bhagavan described earlier as inherently self-endowed with 6 intrinsic opulences in full, Bhagavān Sandarbha, who at the outset of creation assumed that particular form which is celebrated in the Vedas as the Purusha, Purusham Rupam. This is to be said that he manifested the form of the Purusha who was enfolded within him during the period of cosmic dissolution. Jiva's further elaborating here that this first Purusha coming from Śrī Bhagavan, this first Purusha comes forth from Bhagavan, and that Purusha was enfolded within him when there was the last cosmic dissolution. When the cosmos wrapped up last time, it entered into Bhagavan himself. And when there is again an urge or a interest, an intent on the part of Bhagavan for the material manifestation, there is an unfolding of that manifestation. For what purpose? In response, it is said, out of the intention to evolve the cosmos. Loka Shashrikshaya. In other words, he does so with the intent to manifest the living beings, loka or jivas, together with their collective and individual designations, upadhis, who are merged in that very Purusha. How has that form, the Purusha, who was enfolded within him, depicted? In response, Sutta says, he was united with Mahat and so on, meaning that the evolutionary principles, tattvas, beginning with Mahat, were implicit within that form. So when at the last folding up of the cosmic manifestation, Bhagavan took in this Purusha manifestation, he at that time took in a Purusha which had all of the individualized jivas and all their individual and collective designations, upadhis, and all of the ingredients for the material manifestation, these were all there in the Purusha and wrapped up in Bhagavan. Now there's another intention to evolve the universes, and they're coming forth. In this connection, the following proverb is relevant. The mighty rivers issuing forth from the mountains meet together and reach the sea. In this and other similar sayings, the word sambhavati is employed in the sense of meeting or coming together. The evolutionary principles, beginning with Mahat, were dissolved in him alone, the Purusha. So all of the manifestation is here given in the analogy as flowing together to reach the sea of the Purusha, which is enfolded in Bhagavan at the time of the cosmic wrapping up of the universe. In this way, the form that is propounded in the Jagagri verse 131 is specifically, Jagrihi verse, is specifically that of the first Purusha, described as the creator of the Mahat in verses such as, there are three forms of Vishnu, Sattvata, Tantra, and as the Sankarshan who reposes in the causal ocean in Brahma Samhita. So now a little more explanation. Jiva is going into, okay, so this Purusha has manifestations, three principal manifestations, and how are we to see these manifestations? What are their specific characteristics, and where do they reside? Again, how is that form of the Purusha in the state of dissolution further illustrated? To this it is said that he was endowed with the six evolutionary principles, sodasa kalam, meaning that he is replete with the complete potency required for the evolution of the cosmos. Consequently, the one who manifested such a form is Bhagavan. The form manifested by him, however, is that of Paramatma, because it is the support and shelter of all that is to be brought forth by him. That is the conclusion to be drawn from the verse. In other words, there is a distinction here, Jiva is pointing out. There's a distinction between Bhagavan and Paramatma. And the Paramatma that is manifested, that was previously enfolded within Bhagavan, has all of the principles and the potencies to bring forth the cosmic manifestation. So the source of all, of course, is Bhagavan, but the Paramatma, or this first descent of Bhagavan as the Paramatma, has distinct characteristics. You'll note in the presentation of the slides that we'll speak from this background, and it will distinguish slides taken from the commentary as opposed to the white background slides from the direct Anucheta. So we'll read on here. The discussion of Bhagavan and Bhagavān Sandarbha was of a general nature and did not evaluate the specific forms of Bhagavan, such as Krishna, Rāma, or Nṛsiṁha. The fact that Bhagavan has innumerable form brings up the question whether he has one original primary form the other forms being emanations from him, or whether all these forms are independent of each other. Moreover, if both Paramatma and Bhagavan are the absolute reality, what is the relation between them? Additionally, what is the role of Bhagavan in regards to the material cosmos? To answer all these questions, Śrī Jīva Gosvāmī begins this book, the fourth in the series of 6. So we begin here. We said that we see this verse. This verse speaks, the Vedanti verse, of 3 manifestations, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. Now, let us distinguish these 3 manifestations. Well, for Brahman, what can we say? There's no characteristics. There's nothing that needs to be described there, except it's the great, all-pervasive, spiritual, non-dual consciousness. It's everywhere. Now, let's look to the other 2 designations from the Vedanti verse, Bhagavan and Paramatma, and how are we to see them? What is the relationship between one and the other? And what are the characteristics of one and the other? Or are they equal manifestations of divinity that has characteristics? We know Brahman is divinity, but it doesn't display any characteristics. These 2 aspects of divinity do display characteristics. Are they equal? Does one come from the other? This needs to be unpacked. So this is beginning of the Kṛṣṇa Sandarbha, begins that unpacking. Brahman is devoid of attributes, nirguna, and is immediately apprehended through identity consciousness. We can identify with it if we can unidentify with our material involvement in false concepts of ourself. So it can be apprehended in that way. This is the implication of the verse 1.3.33 spoken by Sutta Goswāmī, and this is where Jiva begins. When a Jiva is free from identification from with the gross and subtle bodies by the appearance of authentic self-knowledge, such a person becomes eligible for Brahman realization. Unlike Brahman, the forms of Paramatma and Bhagavan are numerous, and therefore an analysis is required to ascertain the system by which such expansions occur. In the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavat, Sutta Goswāmī affirms that absolute reality is one only as non-dual consciousness, advaya jnana, but it manifests in a variety of aspects pertaining to corresponding diverse levels or dimensions of being. It should be noted once again that the phrase non-dual consciousness does not imply an absolute, utterly devoid of potencies, as is propounded by the radical non-dualist Advaitavadis. And that's where we left off with the in the Paramatma Sandarbha, that there are Shaktis of the Supreme, and that are distinct, and that is the world is not real. It's not it is a real manifestation of those Shaktis. Although how we relate to it can be spoken of in the terms of vivarta, or an illusion. The illusion is just how we relate to the world, but the world itself is not an illusion. It is a true manifestation of the Parinam Shakti of Paramatma. So again, entering into explaining what we mean when we speak about the non-duality of the absolute. One, this non-duality means there is no other reality, tattva, either similar or dissimilar, that is self-existent. 2, the non-dual absolute is supported only by its own inherent potencies. So it exists on its own. It doesn't require anything else to exist. And its inherent potency is its very being. These potencies can have no existence without it as their absolute foundation. And everything else that is manifest is coming from that non-dual absolute. So that is the proper understanding of non-duality, not the Advaitin understanding, which we have discussed previously and will discuss many times in the future, I'm sure. Continuing here, there are 2 types of universes, transphenomenal and phenomenal. Both are unlimited in number. The transphenomenal universes are called Vaikuntha. The Vaikuntha realms are eternal and atemporal, operating outside of any influence of time as we know it. Each is presided over by a specific form of Bhagavan. Although there are unlimited forms of Bhagavan, they are one ontologically. By contrast, the phenomenal universes undergo repeated cycles of evolution, srishti, and dissolution, laya. At the time of dissolution, the entire material creation becomes unmanifest through a process of involution, laya. The gross effects become being merged systematically into their subtle causes. As a consequence, the totality of living beings and primordial nature as a whole become enfolded within the body of Mahavishnu, also called Karnadakshai, or one who reposes on the causal ocean, the boundary between the spiritual and material universes. We'll continue. Mahavishnu is also called Purusha, or the first Purusha, Paramatma, Narayan, and Vishnu. Mahavishnu also merges into the body of Bhagavan during the complete dissolution. Bhagavan, however, does not participate directly in the acts of creation and dissolution. When it is time for a new creative cycle to begin, he manifests the form of Mahavishnu. Here, a distinction, this important distinction is being made, that there is a difference between Bhagavan and this manifestation, which is referred to as the Purusha or Paramatma, Narayan, Vishnu, whatever nomenclature, those specific nomenclatures, not whatever nomenclature, but those specific nomenclatures which designate the supreme absolute in relationship to the material manifestation, and which designate those characteristics of that aspect of the supreme which evolves the cosmos, enters into the cosmos, presides over the cosmos, both through the elemental part, pradana, and also the constituent part, the elements, and also the active ingredients, so to speak, time, those things that seem to bring those elements into motion, give them some life. But still, even those aspects of the Lord's external energies, both those aspects are not conscious. So upadan and nimitta, as we went over in the last Sandarbha. So we'll wrap up here. There's a couple more comments in regards to this first Anucheta. I think what's one important additional point we should take out of it is the different nomenclatures of the Chaturvyuha as they apply to the Paramatma, and those will be elaborated upon in the second Anucheta. So a little technical here. It's going to get a little more technical, but it's significant for us to have this firm grounding in understanding these various descents of the Supreme Bhagavan into the material manifestation, how they differ in manifesting various characteristics of his divine nature, and all this laying a groundwork for our complete involvement in Svayaṁ Bhagavān, Vrajendra Krishna, who is our ideal. But as they say, to know him is to love him, and the more we know of Krishna's various forms and manifestations, the deeper we will be able to enter into a loving relationship with him. Although all this detailed knowledge may not be so significant in that loving mood that we have with Krishna in his original form, we should take careful notice of the fact that when we are privileged with reading the transcendental dialogue of Krishna's most intimate associates in Vraj, they are completely aware of all these various manifestations of the Supreme Lord. And specifically, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he speaks about when he came in these other different forms. So this knowledge is central to that deep appreciation, and it helps to nourish that loving relationship, which will become the very nature of our being in the ultimate sense. Ultimately, our emotions will become our very being in service to Krishna in Vraj. So may seem detailed, may seem, let me go to the Leela, it's much more pleasing. But if we can enter this in the proper mood, and if we look at the Leela that we want to enter into, we'll see that this groundwork is there, firmly established in the spiritual intellect of all those transcendental associates. I will stop for now. If there are any questions, I'm sorry I went a little over. I can try to address those. And if no questions, I will thank you so much for your association. Panchakalpatubhischa, Kripasindabiyevacha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo, Vaishnavijyo Namo Namaha.
Dulal Chandra Prabhu ki jai.
Jai.
Krishna Kirtana Ganana Tanapano Nimamritam Manidhi Dhira Dhira Jana Priyau Priyakarau Nimasanau